The river screamed like a living thing the moment the ice began to split. Mara Whitethorn froze mid-step, her breath snagging in her throat as the sound tore through the night, sharp, violent, unmistakably wrong. Moonlight glazed the frozen banks in pale silver, and the tall firs along the water's edge leaned inward as if listening. Snow skittered across the ice in thin, nervous lines, whispering secrets the land had no intention of keeping. She tightened her grip on the lantern and moved forward anyway. At 30 years old, Mara had learned the difference between fear that saved you and fear that wasted time. This was the kind that demanded motion. The river was changing, and when rivers changed in winter, people disappeared. Her boots crunched over old snow as she followed the sound downstream. The cold bit hard to night-deep, bone-hungry cold that crawled under woolen skin alike. She had wrapped herself carefully before leaving her cabin. 2 skirts, thick stockings, her mother's shawl woven from mountain sheep's wool. None of it felt like enough. Another crack split the air, louder now, followed by a dull, hollow groan from beneath the ice. Mara broke into a run. The lantern light leapt wildly, revealing the river's surface fractured into jagged plates. Near the bend, where the current sped up and the ice always thinned, something dark moved beneath the frozen skin. Not driftwood, not shadow. A hand. Mara dropped to her knees, sliding the last few feet to the edge. The river breathed cold mist into her face as she leaned over, heart hammering. Beneath the ice, trapped in a pocket of black water, a man floated at an angle, his coat tangled in a mess of half-submerged iron chains and broken timber, logging chains, her jaw clenched. The camps upstream had been dumping scrap here all winter, poisoning the water and daring anyone to complain. When she had spoken up, they had laughed, told her to mind her own business, told her she didn't belong. Now the river was collecting its due. "Hold on," she whispered, though she didn't know if he could hear. His eyes were open, glassy with shock, lips blue beneath a frost-rimed beard. He wasn't moving, but the faint tremor of bubbles told her he was still breathing. Barely. She jammed the lantern into the snow and lay flat, spreading her weight. The ice groaned beneath her chest. Cold seeped through her gloves as she reached for the chain binding the man's coat. Her fingers slipped, numb already. She tried again. The river surged, pulling at him and at her. "No," she breathed. "Not tonight." Mara braced her boots against the bank and hauled with everything she had. Pain flared up her arms, sharp and bright. The chain resisted, then shifted. The ice cracked in answer, spiderwebs racing outward. The man's head bumped the underside of the ice. She screamed, not in fear, but fury, and wrenched the chain free. The ice gave way beneath her. Weight. Cold swallowed her whole. It was not like water. It was knives and darkness and shock so sudden her lungs forgot how to work. She kicked blindly, broke the surface with a choking gasp, and clung to the shattered edge. Snow and ice burned her face as she dragged herself back onto the bank. Hauling the man with her inch by inch, they collapsed together, tangled in wet cloth and steam. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the river sealing itself again, ice grinding against ice like teeth closing. Mara rolled onto her side, chest heaving. Her hair had come loose, frozen strands sticking to her cheeks. She crawled toward the man, pressing her ear to his chest. A heartbeat, weak, uneven. But there, she exhaled a sob she hadn't known she was holding and began stripping off his soaked coat, hands clumsy and shaking. His clothes were rough workman's clothes, patched and worn. No fine leather, no polished boots. A laborer. Maybe rail. Maybe logging. A low sound drifted from the trees behind. Her not wind. Mara's body went rigid. She reached for the knife at her belt and turned slowly, lantern casting long, trembling shadows across the snow. A man stepped into the moonlight between the pines. He was tall, wrapped in a dark wool coat dusted with fresh snow. Long black hair spilled over his shoulders, some of it braided with thin leather cords that moved softly in the wind. Silver and bone glinted at his throat and wrist, tribal jewelry worn smooth by time. Not decoration, but history. Apache. Mara's grip tightened on the knife. The man raised his hand slightly, not surrender, but calm, and his eyes met hers. They were dark and steady, reflecting the river's pale light. "You'll freeze if you stay here," he said. His voice was low, firm, carrying easily through the cold. "Come with me." "I don't know you," Mara replied, her voice hoarse from cold and shock. "I know this land," he said, "and I know cold." "You have minutes." She glanced down at the unconscious man beside her, then back at the stranger. Stories crowded her mind, some true, some poisoned by fear. But the river did not lie, and neither did the cold biting deeper into her bones. "Help me," she said finally, "or get out of my way." The Apache man moved without hesitation. He knelt beside the injured stranger, fingers quick and sure as he checked the man's breathing, the angle of his neck, the way his chest rose. He nodded once. "He lives," he said, "but not for long like this." Together they lifted him. The man was heavier than he looked, dead weight dragging at their arms, but the stranger bore most of it without complaint. They moved fast, away from the river, into the shelter of the trees. Mara's cabin sat half a mile uphill, tucked into a narrow stand of firs where the wind broke and the snow lay thinner. She had built it with her husband before sickness took him, before grief hollowed the world. It was small, sturdy, and warm if they could reach it. Her legs burned. Her lungs felt raw. The night pressed in. Watching they reached the cabin just as the storm began to pick up, wind howling through the trees like something hunting. Mara fumbled with the latch, shoved the door open, and they staggered inside. Heat rushed to meet them, thick and smoky. They laid the man on the floor near the fire. Mara slammed the door shut and leaned against it, chest heaving, heart pounding so hard she could taste it. The Apache man shrugged off his coat and knelt again, already working. As if this were not strange or dangerous, but simply necessary. Mara watched him for a long moment, knife still in her hand. "What's your name?" she asked. He did not look up. "Tayan." She nodded once. "Mara Whitethorn." At that, his hands paused just briefly before continuing. "Your people wintered near Split Ridge," he said quietly. "Before the camps," she replied. "Before the river filled with iron." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire crackled, and the night that had tried to claim them all waited patiently for another chance. The fire popped inside as if it too were catching its breath. Mara crouched beside it, feeding in slivers of dry pine with hands that still shook despite the heat pressing against her face. Steam rose from her soaked skirts, filling the cabin with a sharp smell of wet wool and river ice. Every nerve in her body felt scraped raw. When she flexed her fingers, pain flared, then dulled into a deep ache. Behind her, Tayan worked in silence. She did not have to turn to know what he was doing. The sounds told her enough: a soft tear of fabric, the muted clink of metal as he set aside the man's belt buckle, the controlled rhythm of breath that never once wavered. Whoever Tayan was, he had done this before, too many times. "You can hang your coat there," Mara said without looking back, nodding toward a peg near the door. "It'll dry faster." "I'm warm," Tayan replied. She almost laughed at that. Almost. The unconscious man lay on a pallet near the hearth, his skin pale beneath the grime and frost. As Tayan peeled away the last of his soaked layers, Mara caught sight of the wound she'd been too cold, too desperate to fully see before. A deep gash ran along the man's scalp, crusted dark with blood. His left hand was swollen badly, fingers bent at an unnatural angle. Bruises bloomed along his ribs, purple and yellow beneath the skin. This wasn't just the river, Mara said quietly. No, Tayan agreed. He was hurt before he fell in. Mara rose, crossing the cabin to a small shelf where bundles of dried plants hung from twine. Her mother's hands had tied those knots years ago. She took down yarrow and spruce pitch, grinding them together in a stone bowl with practiced motions. Did you see anyone else? She asked. Tayan shook his head. Not near the river. That didn't ease the tightness in her chest. She knelt beside the injured man and dabbed the mixture along the gash. His face twitched, lips parting as a faint sound escaped him, not words, but fear given voice. His eyes fluttered beneath half-frozen lashes. Easy, Mara murmured. You're safe. For now. The words felt strange on her tongue. Safety had been a rare thing in her life lately. As she worked. She felt Tayan's gaze on her, not intrusive, not judging, observant, as if he were mapping the space, the risks, the people inside it. You live alone, he said. Yes, no dogs. They were poisoned last winter. His jaw tightened. The camps. She nodded. Silence stretched, broken only by the fire and the wounded man's breathing. Outside, the storm gathered itself again, wind clawing at the cabin like something denied entry. When the man stirred more violently, thrashing weakly, Mara and Tayan moved together without speaking. Tayan braced the man's shoulders while Mara pressed a cloth to his forehead. Easy, she said again, firmer this time. The man gasped, eyes flying open. Panic flooded his face as he tried to sit up, then screamed when pain shot through him. No, no. The ice, don't let them. He fought them with surprising strength, fueled by terror. His heel kicked the edge of the hearth, sending sparks skittering across the floor. Tayan leaned close, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. You are not there. You are inside. You are breathing. Look at me. The man's eyes locked onto Tayan's, wild and unfocused. For a heartbeat, Mara feared he would lash out harder. Instead, his breath hitched. Again. The tension drained from his body in a shuddering wave, leaving him sagging back against the pallet, sobbing like a child. They're going to kill her, he whispered hoarsely. Mara stilled. Who? She asked. The woman, he said. The one at the rail camp. They said she stole it. They said she talked. Mara and Tayan exchanged a glance. What did she steal? Tayan asked. The man laughed weakly, a broken sound. The truth. Mara's heart began to pound harder than it had even at the river. The rail camp lay 2 days' walk north, perched where the valley narrowed and the mountains pressed close. Men came through sometimes hungry, angry, drunk. They paid poorly and took freely. Mara avoided it when she could. What truth? She pressed. The man swallowed, wincing. The ledger, names, wages, men who went missing after asking questions. Mara's fingers curled into fists. She had heard whispers. Loggers who never came back downriver. Rail workers paid in scrip that couldn't be spent anywhere. Graves dug too fast, too shallow. Where is it now? She asked. The man's eyes slid toward the door, toward the dark outside. I hid it, where no one would look. Tayan's voice was steady. Where? The river, the man said. Under the ice. I tied it to the chain. Thought I could come back for it. Thought I had time. Mara felt a cold deeper than winter settle into her bones. You were running, she said. From them. He nodded faintly. They found out. Chased me all the way to the bend. I slipped. Or maybe they pushed. I don't remember. A long silence followed. Finally, Mara stood and crossed the cabin, bracing herself against the wall. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on her, danger layered upon danger. Harboring a man like this could cost her more than her cabin. It could cost her life. They'll come looking, she said. Yes, Tayan replied. Mara turned to face him. Firelight carved his features into sharp planes, shadowing old scars along his cheek and neck. He looked like a man who had made peace with risk long ago. You could leave, she said. This isn't your fight. Tayan met her gaze. It became mine when the river tried to take us. Before she could answer, the man on the pallet groaned again, his voice cracking. They'll kill her tonight, he whispered. They said they'd make an example. Mara closed her eyes. She saw the faces of the men from the camp hard, bored, cruel in the way of those who believe themselves untouchable. She thought of the poisoned dogs, the laughter, the iron dumped into the river. When she opened her eyes, her decision had already been made. Rest, she told the injured man. You won't be moving tonight. She turned to Tayan. At first light, we go north. Tayan inclined his head. I will watch until then. As the hours dragged on, Mara dozed in a chair near the hearth, waking often to check the man's breathing, to listen for footsteps outside that never came. Each time she stirred, she saw Tayan awake, seated near the door like a carved figure, eyes alert, presence steady. Just before dawn, the storm finally broke. Pale light crept through the frost-rimmed window, painting the cabin in gray and blue. The world outside lay hushed and brittle, as if waiting. Mara rose, pulling on dry clothes, tying her hair back with a strip of leather. She packed what little she could: bandages, food, her knife. As she slung the pack over her shoulder, she caught Tayan watching her. What? She asked. You choose difficult paths, he said. She smiled thinly. They seem to like me. Outside, the river lay quiet again, hiding its secrets beneath a skin of ice. For now. Dawn never truly arrived in the mountains. It only thinned the darkness enough to make danger visible. Mara and Tayan moved north through timber and frozen ravines, keeping off the main trail where boot prints would tell stories they did not want told. The injured man had been left behind at the cabin with food, water, and instructions to stay hidden no matter what he heard. Mara had hated leaving him, but hauling him farther would have been a death sentence for all of them. The cold had sharpened overnight. Each breath sliced the lungs. Frost clung to Mara's eyelashes, and her thighs burned as she climbed. The land here rose in broken shelves of rock and pine, scarred by old slides and half-frozen streams that sang softly under their skins of ice. Tayan stopped often. Crouching to read signs, Mara could not see bent grass, disturbed snow, the faint drag of something heavy. Each time, his expression tightened. They are moving already, he said once. More than 3. Mara swallowed. Then they believe the ledger is gone. Yes. They crested a ridge just as the rail camp came into view below them. It did not look like a place where truth survived. Engines squatted like black beasts along a half-laid track, steam hissing angrily into the cold air. Rough cabins leaned at crooked angles, patched with scrap wood and tin. Men moved between them with rifles slung casually, their laughter sharp and careless. Smoke rose from cook fires thick with grease and bitterness. Mara's jaw clenched. She had been here once before, months ago, trading hides for flour. A foreman with pale eyes had stared at her as if she were something he meant to own someday. She remembered the way his smile never reached his eyes. Tayan studied the camp silently. They will not keep her in the open, he said. They will hide her where the noise cover screams. Mara followed his gaze to the engine shed near the far end of camp, where iron rang constantly and steam drowned out everything else. Her stomach twisted. They circled wide, using the slope and a stand of dead trees as cover. Snow crunched underfoot, each sound too loud in Mara's ears. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, the way her mother had taught her when fear threatened to take over. At the edge of camp, Tayan stopped her with a hand to her arm. "We split," he said quietly. "You find the woman. I will draw their eyes." "That's suicide," Mara hissed. Tayan's expression didn't change. "It is necessary." Mara searched his face, looking for doubt, for recklessness. She found neither. Only resolve. "If you don't come back," she began. "I will," he said. She didn't argue further. They clasped forearms once brief, fierce, and then Tayan turned and melted into the shadows like smoke. Mara waited 3 heartbeats. Then the first shout rang out. Chaos followed like fire finding. Oil. A rifle cracked. Men yelled. Someone cursed loudly, laughter breaking into alarm. Mara used the moment, slipping between supply crates and stacked rails, keeping low. The smell hit her hard coal: smoke, sweat, oil, and blood layered so thick it felt like breathing through cloth. She reached the engine shed, just as another gunshot split the air farther back. Men ran toward the sound, boots pounding. Mara slipped inside. Heat slammed into her, wet and suffocating. The great iron engine loomed at the center, valves shrieking, pistons pumping with relentless force. Sparks flew, lighting the interior in violent flashes. She spotted the woman immediately. She was tied to a support beam near the back, wrists bound high, dark hair plastered to her face with sweat. One side of her cheek was swollen, split at the lip. Her eyes were open, burning with fury rather than fear. Mara crossed the space in 3 strides and cut the ropes. The woman sagged, nearly falling, and Mara caught her. "Can you walk?" Mara shouted over the noise. The woman nodded once. "I can run." They moved together toward the side door just as a shadow fell across the entrance. The foreman stepped inside. He was broader than Mara remembered, his coat unbuttoned, revolver loose in his hand. His pale eyes flicked from Mara to the woman, and his mouth curled into something ugly. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled. "Looks like the river didn't finish the job." Mara stepped forward, putting herself between him and the woman. Her knife was already in her hand. "You've lost," she said. "The ledger's gone." The foreman laughed. "Doesn't matter. Men forget. Graves don't talk." He raised the gun. The shot never came. A blur of motion slammed into him from the side, knocking the revolver skittering across the floor. Tayan hit him like a falling tree. The 2 men crashed into the stacked tools, iron screaming as it fell. Mara grabbed the woman's hand. "Go!" They ran behind them. The foreman roared in pain and rage. More shouts erupted outside. The camp exploded into confusion as men scrambled, some firing wildly, others chasing shadows. They burst from the shed into blinding daylight. A bullet tore through the air and punched into the snow inches from Mara's foot. "Run!" The woman yelled. They sprinted toward the tree line, lungs burning, legs screaming. Another shot rang out. The woman cried out and stumbled. Mara caught her before she fell. Blood spread dark and fast across the woman's coat. They reached the edge of the woods just as Tayan emerged from the chaos. Face streaked with soot, blood running from a cut above his eye. He took one look at the woman and swore under his breath. They plunged into the trees as more gunfire chased them, branches snapping, snow exploding around them. The sounds faded only when the land rose sharply and the forest thickened, enough to swallow noise. They didn't stop until the woman collapsed. Mara knelt, pressing hard against the wound. It was bad but not fatal, high in the shoulder, bleeding heavy but clean. "You're alive," the woman said through clenched teeth, staring at Mara. "So is the ledger?" Mara nodded. "Hidden. For now." The woman laughed weakly. "Good, I'll hang for it." Tayan knelt beside them, tearing strips from his shirt to bind the wound. "They will not stop," he said. They will hunt. Mara looked north, toward higher ground where the mountains folded into places even the rail men feared. Then we don't give them the chance, she said. We end this. Above them, the wind carried the distant sound of shouting, but it no longer sounded confident. For the first time since the river cracked open, Mara felt something shift, not hope, resolve. The mountains changed their mind about winter the night Mara decided to end it. Snow still clung to the shaded slopes, but the wind had softened, carrying the smell of wet stone and thawing earth. Water ran beneath the ice now, louder, restless, as if it knew secrets were about to surface. Mara stood at the edge of the high ravine, lantern shuddered in her hand, watching the thin line of firelight far below where the railmen had made camp again closer this time. Boulder dot they were hunting. The injured woman lay wrapped in blankets behind her, breathing shallow but steady. Tayan knelt nearby, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The rhythm was calming, almost ceremonial. They will not expect this, he said without looking up. They never do, Mara replied. The ledger lay hidden in her pack, wrapped in oilcloth, heavier than it had any right to be. Not because of paper, but because of what it carried: names, dates, proof written in careful, damning ink. Enough to break men who believed themselves untouchable. Mara tightened the straps of her pack and turned to the woman. When we move, stay close to Tayan. If anything happens, I don't plan on dying tonight, the woman said, voice hoarse but fierce. Too many men owe me answers. Mara smiled despite herself. They moved just before dawn, when the world hovered between night and morning and even birds held their breath. The ravine path was narrow, slick with meltwater, twisting downward toward the river gorge where the track crossed on a temporary trestle. The railmen had chosen the spot for speed, not safety. Mara had chosen it for truth. They reached the gorge as the first light bled into the sky. The river thundered below, swollen and fast, chewing at its banks. The trestle creaked under the weight of a parked engine and supply cars. Iron and wood strained to their limits. Tayan moved ahead, vanishing into shadow. Minutes later, a soft whistle echoed signal. Mara led the woman along the narrow ledge toward the trestle supports. Each step felt deliberate, final. Her heart beat hard, steady, no room left for fear. They reached the support beams and crouched. Tayan emerged from below, eyes sharp. They are awake, he said, but not alert. Mara nodded. She pulled the ledger from her pack and tucked it inside her coat. Then it's time. She stepped out onto the open ground before the camp. Hey, she shouted. Voices erupted. Men stumbled from tents, hands reaching for rifles. The foreman pushed forward, face twisted with disbelief and rage when he saw her. You, he snarled. You should have frozen. Mara held her ground. You should have paid your men. Laughter rippled uncertain, uneasy. Mara raised her voice. You stole wages. You buried bodies. You blamed anyone you thought wouldn't fight back. The foreman spat into the dirt. Who's going to believe you? Mara pulled the ledger free and held it high. Everyone. A murmur spread through the camp. Men shifted, glancing at one another. The foreman's eyes flicked to his men. Then back to Mara. His hand tightened around his gun. Kill her, he said. The first shot rang out. Tayan moved. From beneath the trestle, he drove a wedge free. Wood screamed. Iron groaned. The ground shook. The engine lurched violently as the support gave way, tipping one of the supply cars sideways. Men shouted, scrambling as cargo spilled, crates bursting open, tools and iron raining down toward the roaring river. Mara ran. Bullets tore the air, but panic had fractured their aim. She reached the trestle just as Tayan surged up beside her, grabbing her arm and hauling her forward. The foreman fired again. The injured woman stepped out from cover, rifle braced against her good shoulder. Her shot rang clean and true. The foreman fell, shock frozen on his face as he hit the ground hard and did not rise. Silence followed, broken only by the river and the groaning trestle. The remaining men stood frozen, staring at the fallen car, at the ledger in Mara's hands, at the truth unraveling around them. "You can leave," Mara said, voice steady, "or you can answer for what you've done." No one moved to challenge her. By noon, the camp was abandoned. They followed the river south, not stopping until the mountains softened into open forest and the air grew warmer. By the time they reached the nearest settlement, news had already traveled faster than they had. The ledger changed hands carefully, formally. Lawmen read it with pale faces. Warrants were written. Names were spoken aloud in rooms where silence had ruled too long. Mara did not stay to watch. She returned to her cabin with Tayan, the river running clear beside them now, no longer clogged with iron. The injured woman left 2 days later, walking steadily, shoulders squared. She clasped Mara's hands before she went. "You gave me my life back," she said. Mara shook her head. "You took it back." Spring came quietly. Snow retreated into shadows. Mud swelled on branches. The river laughed instead of screamed. Mara repaired the cabin roof, mended the fence, planted early greens. Life found its way back into her hands. Tayan stayed longer than she expected. He helped without asking, cutting wood, setting traps, teaching her to read the land the way he did. At night, they sat by the fire and spoke of things that had nothing to do with survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the river gold, Mara broke the silence. "You could keep going," she said. "There's nothing tying you here." Tayan watched the water. "There is." She waited. "This land remembers now," he said. "So do I." Mara nodded, understanding more than words could hold. The cold night that had once threatened to take everything had passed. Not because winter had ended, but because she no longer faced it alone. The river flowed on, carrying iron away, leaving truth in its wake. And for the first time in a long while, Mara Whitethorn stood still, unafraid of what came next.